How do you handle unfavorable situations when you had to convince business representatives to change their decision? As a business analyst, I was involved in research and then making recommendations about the best feasible solutions. In this question, the hiring manager wants to see how you can handle this situation. Standing up to a business or client and convincing them to use a different approach requires a substantial amount of skill, especially if you are sharing something the decision-maker doesn't want to hear. Situation: briefly explain the issue you were dealing with in a positive, constructive way. Task: explain your role in the situation. Action: explain what you did to resolve or address the situation. Result: explain your learnings and how your actions resulted in a positive impact on the business. For example, the business representative is from a technical background and he wants to use a particular technology that he is comfortable with but is an old technology with less flexibility and scalability. I approached the business representative and explained, supporting my position with data, that the technology would actually hinder productivity not just in the short term but in the long term as well. What are the main qualities of a good requirement? Requirement quality can be measured on basis of the SMART or DEEP rule. SMART, specific: the requirement should be specific enough so that it can be documented properly. Measurable, should be able to measure the success criteria of the requirement by different parameters. Attainable, the requirement should be feasible within the scope of the given resources. Relevant, the requirement should be in line with the project's business case. Timely, the requirement should be communicated timely or early in the project life cycle. Deep, detailed enough, acceptance criteria to get started. Emergent, the product backlog is never complete, it is refined over time, estimated relatively, sized in terms of effort, prioritized, ordered by value, risk, cost, dependencies, etc. What are the best practices you follow while writing a use case? The following are the best practices that are followed to write a clear and well-documented use case. Capture both functional and non-functional requirements in a use case. Include use case diagrams along with the use case. Include the UI details, notes in the use case. Tips for writing successful use cases: develop your use cases iteratively, involve users directly, depict your use cases visually, use your use cases to harvest non-functional requirements, prioritize your use cases and use case scenarios, trace your use cases, verify your use cases. What is your requirement elicitation strategy? Elicitation is a practice of collecting requirements from end customers and stakeholders. It is a requirement gathering process. Direct collaboration with the client, facilitated workshops, interviews, and observing the end users are the key elicitation strategy. In conjunction, we can use techniques that provide us with more precise information like prototype and scenario building. Here are the 9 elicitation techniques defined by the Baybock for business analysts. Brainstorming, document analysis, focus groups, interface analysis, interviews, observation, prototyping, requirements, workshops, survey, questionnaire. When do you know that you have gathered all the requirements? Once the requirements are gathered, they are validated by the business users, client. It is only after the approval of the business users, the requirements are considered to be completed. Additionally, it should be validated that they are elicited from all the stakeholders, from all the critical stakeholders of the project. Description of which capabilities will and will not be included in the project scope. They align with the project's business case. Rules concerning operational decision-making must be taken into consideration by the solution. When they could be done with the resources available, i.e. attainable. When the stakeholders of the project are in consensus with the elicited requirements. The criteria to be used to judge the quality of the solution outside its specific behaviors, requirements on response time, capacity, reliability, usability, etc. The interfaces to other systems and external entities within the project scope. The requirements meet your organization's test for quality. All the requirements which pass the above criteria are considered to be formal and final. These requirements are then documented and become a part of the project scope. What is scope creep, causes and how to avoid it? Scope creep or requirement creep is defined as the uncontrolled or sudden changes or deviations in the project's scope without changes in other resources, schedule, budget, of the project. Scope creep is a risk to the project and is usually caused by ambiguous or unrefined scope definition, lack of any formal scope or requirements management, improper documentation of project's requirements, poor estimation and lack of prioritization of features. Poor communication with business sponsors and stakeholders results in lack of sponsorship and stakeholder involvement, lack of client agreement on the scope. Project length. Scope creep is a hindrance to the project's success and could be avoided by clearly documenting the scope of the project. For example, scope statements should include both features in and out of scope. Use progressive elaboration. Following proper requirement and change management, for example, processes for scope modeling, analysis, prioritization, traceability, and change management. Informing the effects of the change to the affected parties before making a change. Documenting the new requirements in the project log. Refrain from adding additional features to the existing functionalities, also called gold plating. Engage business sponsors and stakeholders. For example, sponsors should develop project charters to keep ownership where it belongs. Project status should be reported to engage sponsors and bring focus on progress towards the deliverables. Decompose projects into smaller sub-projects. Educate sponsors to chunk projects into shorter sub-projects and to focus on tight deliverables. What all steps are included in developing a product from a basic idea? In the process of developing a product from an idea, there are many steps to be followed as enlisted below. Market analysis. This is a business plan through which the characteristics of a market have been studied, like how the market changes and behaves dynamically. SWOT analysis. This is a process through which the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of an organization are identified. Personas. These are typical users of websites or intranets who represent the goals and characteristics of various large groups of users. Personas replicate the real users in functional design. Competitor analysis. Evaluation of the strengths and weaknesses of outside competitors. Strategic vision and feature set. The process of developing the goals in present and planning to achieve the same in the future by moving towards the vision. Prioritize features. All the features of the product that is to be developed are prioritized by the product management to help the development team. Explain the business analysis process flow. The process of business analysis is generally divided into multiple steps, with each step involving specific tasks to perform, principles to follow, and documents to produce. Gather background information. Bessel analysis. Porter's 5 forces framework. Identify the key stakeholders, stakeholder matrix, owners, managers, employees, regulators, suppliers, partners, customers, competitors. Discover business objective, business objectives list, benchmarking, SWOT analysis, focus groups, and brainstorming, making business objectives smart, etc. Evaluate available options, business case document, cost-benefit analysis, impact analysis, risk analysis, etc. Scope definition. Scope definition document define the delivery plan. Delivery plan define project requirements, functional and non-functional requirements, interviewing the stakeholders, requirements defining techniques, etc. Implementation by SDLC evaluate value added by project, actual progress across the timeline and business objectives. What are the various diagrams that you know about? There are various types of diagrams that BA use in their work. A few important diagrams among them are: A. Activity diagram. This represents the flow from one activity to the other activity. Activity refers to the operation of the system. B. Data flow diagram. Graphical representation of the flow of data into and out of the system. This diagram represents how data is shared between organizations. C. Use case diagram. This diagram describes the set of actions that systems perform with one or more actors, users, of the systems. Use case diagram is also called as a behavioral diagram. D. Class diagram. This is the structural diagram that represents the structure of the system by showing its classes, objects, methods or operations, attributes, etc. A class diagram is the main building block for detailed modeling which is used for programming. E. Entity relationship diagram. ER diagram is a graphical representation of entities and the relationships between them. This is a data modeling technique. F. Sequence diagram. The sequence diagram describes the interaction between the objects, like how they operate and in what time sequence the messages flow from one object to the other. H. Collaboration diagram. The collaboration diagram represents the communication that occurs between the objects by showing what is business modeling and business process modeling. A project will involve a set of activities from start to finish. A critical path is the set of activities that includes the longest path in the whole project. So, critical path analysis is a key component in reducing project timelines and controlling cost. Business modeling is identifying the value proposition for a business and then building a step-by-step approach for operating the business. This step-by-step approach is known as business modeling. It includes vision, mission, and strategies to achieve the goals. What is an activity diagram? Activity diagrams describe how activities are coordinated to provide a service that can be at different levels of abstraction. Typically, an event needs to be achieved by some operations, particularly where the operation is intended to achieve a number of different things that require coordination, or how the events in a single use case relate to one another. In particular, use cases where activities may overlap and require coordination. It is also suitable for modeling how a collection of use cases coordinate to represent business workflows. Identify candidate use cases. Through the examination of business workflows, identify pre- and post-conditions, the context, for use cases, model workflows within use cases, model complex workflows in operations on objects, model in detail complex activities in a high-level activity diagram. Differentiate an alternate flow and exception flow of a use case diagram. Basic flow represents the activities carrying out in order as required by the business. Alternate flow represents actions that are performed apart from the basic flow and also be considered as an optional flow. Whereas exception flow is executed in a case or any errors. Example: when we open a login page of any website, there is a link "Forgot password" to retrieve the password. This is called an alternate flow. In the same login page, if we enter the correct username and password, Sometimes we get an error message stating 404 error. This is called the exception flow. Why would the business analyst use Kano analysis? Kano analysis refers to the process of analyzing a product or system requirements to determine what the perceived impact will be on customer satisfaction. The Kano model categorizes product attributes or system requirements into three categories to determine the perceived customer satisfaction. Unexpected delights. These are attributes of a product or system that the customer doesn't even know they need or want. The absence of these has no impact on customer perception or satisfaction. However, the existence of these results can delight customers and drive premium pricing. Performance attributes. These are attributes of a product or system that follow a fairly direct correlation to customer satisfaction levels, either positive or negative. If these attributes are missing or of poor quality, then customers will be dissatisfied. However, the better these attributes are, the more the customer's satisfaction levels rise. Must-have attributes. These are attributes of a product or system that, if missing, would be considered unacceptable and result in dissatisfaction. However, the existence of the attribute or improvement on it wouldn't increase customer satisfaction in any meaningful way. What is meant by benchmarking? The entire process of measuring the quality of policies, programs, products, rules and many other measures of a company against the standard measures set for those attributes or against the other similar companies is termed as benchmarking in BA. What is UML modeling and objective of using UML in business analysis? UML is a unified modeling language. UML is normal that the business practices for envisaging, recording, and building numerous components of a system. It is a modeling standard cast off mainly for software development, but can also be used for additional theoretical models such as relating job roles, occupational procedures, and administrative functions. For business analysts, UML is able to signify necessities with use cases, class plan, and state drawings. For business analysts, the significant part of considering UML is in thoughtful the drawing tools and when and in what way to use them greatest. UML business analysis is needed for the following reasons: to define the system behavior, to detect the errors, to propose design plans to stakeholders,